本日は休日にもかかわらずこの講演会にご参加いただき誠にありがとうございます。私は本学のグローバル地域文化学部の教員をしております小野文夫と申します。本日は篠辺淳也センター長が公務出張のため、代わりに本センターの共同研究員もしております私が司会を務めさせていただきます。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。本日の講演会は神学部教授の安田多賀光編先生のご尽力のもと、ドロンコ編先生、平岡幸太郎研究員、そして神学研究科大学院生の神田愛子さんのご尽力により実現したものです。あらかじめお礼申し上げます。この講演会は私たちが行っておりますユダヤ学のプロジェクトの一環で開催されます。この一神教学際研究センターが発刊しておりますいくつかの雑誌があるのですが、その最新号にもカバラーとスーフィズムをテーマにした特集号があります。これはボリュームの第8巻ですが、これは受付のところにもございますので、ご関心のある方はどうぞ手に取って読んでください。また通訳を務めていただくのは小寺由美さんです。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。さて、この一神教学際研究センターはユダヤ教、キリスト教、イスラムの3つの一神教について、その文化や世界観、社会事情などに関する理解を深め、研究するための活動を続けております。その活動の一環として、一神教世界における古代の宗教的伝統から現代の紛争や宗教問題まで、あるいは宗教間対話の可能性など、さまざまな問題をテーマにした公開講演会を開催しております。本日の公開講演は、ユダヤ哲学とは何かという問題をテーマにしていますから、3つの一神教のうち、特にユダヤ教に焦点づけたお話になるかと思います。しかし、そうは言いましても、本日のお話でも言及されるユリウス・グッドマンがその著書、ユダヤ教の哲学の冒頭で述べておりますように、ユダヤ哲学とは違法の思想の前時的吸収の歴史であり、その違法の思想はユダヤ教特有の視点に基づいて変容され、それに見合ったものに変えられるということを通じて形成されていったものです。ですから、ヘレニズム時代から現代に至るまで、ギリシャ思想、イスラム思想、キリスト教思想、近代西洋哲学など、さまざまな思想との相互作用の中で、その伝統を生み出してきたものだと言えるでしょう。本日のお話の副題には、中世の視点とありますが、まさに中世こそ、イスラム文化やそれを介したヘレニズム文化とユダヤ教との相互作用が最も活発になり、豊かな思想文化が花開いた時代でもあります。その意味で、ユダヤ哲学を主題としてはおりますが、より広い一神教世界が育んできた深い思想的交流の歴史や文化を背景としたお話になるかと思います。それでは本日の講師でありますジョセフ・スターン教授を紹介したいと思います。スターン教授に関しまして、あるいは今日のお話の資料といたしまして、皆さんのお手元にこういう、マテリアルがあると思いますが、これをご参照ください。また、お話の途中でさまざまな人物が出てきますが、それは2ページ目から3ページ目、4ページ目にかけて、年譜とともにさまざまな人が活躍した時代についてですね、書かれてあります。これを適宜ご参照いただき、お話をお聞きください。それではジョセフ・スターン教授についてですが、スターン教授は1949年アメリカ合衆国にてお生まれになりました。ニューヨークのコロンビア大学に学ばれ、1979年に哲学博士号を取得されました。 また1967年から70年まではイスラエルのヤブネ・イェシバト・ケレムというタルムードアカデミーにてラビユダヤ教の勉強をされました。1979年よりシカゴ大学にて教員活動を開始され、その後神学部長やシカゴユダヤ学センターの所長などを歴任されました。現在はシカゴ大学哲学部にてウィリアム・コルビン記念哲学講座の教授をされています。また神学部の兼任教授、そしてユダヤ学プログラムの役員も務めていらっしゃいます。ご専門は哲学、とりわけ英米圏の分析哲学、言語哲学および中世ユダヤ哲学です。この両方の領域にわたって数多くの著作と論文を執筆されていますが、主著の一つでありますマイモニデスの迷える者の導きの質量と形式によってアメリカ哲学史ジャーナルの2014年書籍の部の最優秀賞を受賞されました。現在言語哲学と中世ユダヤ哲学の分野を牽引する代表的研究者のお一人であり、その業績によりイタリア、イスラエル、中国など世界各国の諸大学で客員教授としてご活躍もされています。そのような先生を本日はこの京都、この同志社大学にお招きすることができ、そのご専門である中世哲学の視点からユダヤ哲学とは何かというテーマでお話を伺えることは大変嬉しく思います。それではスタン先生、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。Please start your lecture.
I'm very happy to be here to give you this talk and to be in Japan, to get to know the community of Japanese scholars. So thank you for coming to my talk. The question, what is Jewish philosophy, is typically answered by describing Jewish philosophies, that is, the books, theories, and doctrines of canonical Jewish philosophers, Saadia Gaon, Moses Maimonides, Judah HaLevi, Levi Gersonides. All these names are on that chronology which you have. Indeed, the great historian of Jewish philosophy, Julius Gutmann, entitled his classic treatise, Philosophies of Judaism. But Jewish philosophy is more than a sequence of doctrines or books. Like all philosophy, it's an activity, something one does. For some, it's an intellectual exercise that solves theoretical puzzles. For others, it is a set of practices that constitute a way of life, practices that give central place to the intellect and reasoning, but aim at a practical end, the achievement of happiness or a harmonious life in which one's Judaism and intellect are in sync. To the best of my knowledge, the very idea that there exists a specific branch of philosophy called Jewish philosophy was an invention of 19th century historians and philologists of Wissenschaft des Judentums, the science of Judaism, who sought to claim a field of scholarship dedicated to Judaism and the Jews in order to legitimate their academic respectability. In other words, unlike the physical world, which exists prior to the scientific discipline physics that investigates it, the subject matter Jewish philosophy was the creation of an academic discipline called the history of Jewish philosophy. Of course, since at least Philo of Alexandria in the 1st century, there have been Jewish thinkers engaged in philosophy, but that there was or is a distinctive field or subject matter of philosophy, Jewish philosophy, with its own defining features, is another matter. This product was made by an academic discipline as much as the discipline studies it. What was it then that those thinkers and authors were doing? And I'll concentrate now on the medieval case, since that's the case I know best. What was it that they were doing that we scholars nowadays refer to as medieval Jewish philosophy? Well, the simple answer is they're doing philosophy. But stating what philosophy is, say in a definition, is no easier than spelling out what Jewish philosophy is. Instead, I'll sketch two examples of different models of philosophy which two seminal medieval Jewish philosophers enacted, Saadia Gaon and Moses Maimonides. But first you might reasonably ask, if it was simply philosophy they were doing, why even label it Jewish philosophy? Let me first tell you what Jewish philosophy is not. It's not philosophy composed or studied in a Jewish language, for example, Hebrew. We do speak of medieval Arabic philosophy and medieval Latin philosophy, meaning medieval philosophy written in Arabic or in Latin, but we can't describe the full gamut of medieval Jewish philosophy as medieval Hebrew philosophy. Philo Judaeus of Alexandria wrote in Greek, and works written in the Islamic Empire by Saadia, Maimonides, and Judah HaLevi were all composed in Arabic, or Judeo-Arabic, Arabic in Hebrew characters. Strictly speaking then, Maimonides counts as Arabic, though not Islamic philosophy, just as Avicenna's Danishnama, written in Persian, falls under Islamic but not Arabic philosophy. Only after 1148 do medieval Jewish philosophers in Christian Europe in general compose and read works in Hebrew. And of course, for modern Jewish philosophy, after the Enlightenment in the 18th century, the relevant languages include German, French, and English. Moreover, not everything philosophical written or read in Hebrew should necessarily count as Jewish philosophy. Many Aristotelian and Arabic philosophical texts were translated into Hebrew, and some only survive in their medieval Hebrew translations. Is this sufficient for them to count as Jewish philosophy? And to complicate matters, many medieval Jewish thinkers composed super commentaries in Hebrew on commentaries originally written in Arabic but then translated into Hebrew. For example, Gersonides' super commentaries on Averroes Ibn Rushd's Arabic commentaries on Greek classics by Aristotle. If these super commentaries are part of medieval Jewish philosophy, and they should be, should the Hebrew translated Arabic commentaries on which they are super commentaries, or the original Greek texts translated into Hebrew, also cross the boundary? Maybe it would be more accurate to say that there is no boundary. In any case, language alone cannot settle the question, what is Jewish philosophy? Second, you don't have to be Jewish to do Jewish philosophy. And by the same token, not just any kind of philosophy composed by a Jew, that is someone of Jewish descent, is Jewish philosophy. Some medieval Jewish philosophical texts were composed after their author's conversion to Islam, for example, Abu Barakat al-Baghdadi, or Christianity, for example, Profiat Duran, Joshua Lorky, Abner of Burgos, who considered himself a Jewish philosopher even while he was a Christian bishop. Likewise, whether one regards the medieval sectarian movement, the Karaites, as inside or outside Judaism, philosophy and theology written by Karaites is also generally considered part of the repertoire of medieval Jewish philosophy. And if one looks at modern figures, Bergson, Nagel, and Kripke are all Jewish and all philosophers, but their works are not Jewish philosophy. Once again, we cannot define Jewish philosophy using the religion or ethnic identity of the philosopher who composed it. Is Jewish philosophy something like English, French, or American philosophy? Something like a school or a style of philosophy? Just as early modern empiricist or materialistic philosophy, for example, the works of Hobbes, Locke, or Hume, is sometimes labeled British empiricism, or just as early modern rationalist philosophy, say by Descartes, Malebranche, Spinoza, and Leibniz, is identified with France or the European continent? Is there one philosophical orientation or movement or style that marks Jewish philosophers or philosophy? Again, the answer is no. Medieval Jewish philosophers were Kalam dialectical theologians. They were Aristotelians, Neoplatonists, Pietists, or Sufis. No one school or orientation characterizes medieval Jewish philosophy. A final suggestion is that Jewish philosophy is the philosophy of Judaism, or as we say nowadays, the philosophical foundations of Judaism. This idea is more promising, notwithstanding modern secular exceptions like Achad Ha'am, but it immediately raises the thorny question of how such a conception of Jewish philosophy differs from Jewish theology, that is, the systematic study of the doctrines, practices, and culture of Judaism as a revealed religion. Nowadays, this question generally makes scholars of Judaism anxious because of an acquired allergy to theology. But it hasn't always been that way, especially if we take theology to be human reasoning about the nature of God and divinity. We'll return to philosophical theology with Sadia, but for now, let me simply stipulate what I mean by this conception of Jewish philosophy as a philosophy of Judaism. Judaism, primarily manifest by its canonical texts, simply serves as the datum, the subject matter, on which Jewish philosophers analytically reflect, exploring its presuppositions, making distinctions, articulating its claims and concepts, exposing ambiguities and imprecise beliefs, laying out arguments, and evaluating their truth and validity. This is no different from what we nowadays call the philosophical foundations of biology or physics or mathematics or economics. Although Jewish philosophy of this kind may have originated in polemical contexts, it need not adopt a stance either defending or advocating Judaism. And while the philosopher may be committed to the claims he's philosophizing about, this commitment may be no different than the priority the philosopher of biology or physics assigns to the biological or physical facts about which he's philosophizing. That is, the philosopher doesn't challenge the data of either biology or a religion, even when he finds them problematic or enigmatic. Not because they're metaphysically privileged, but because they're the data, what he's talking about. As Maimonides says in the name of Themistius, he shapes his theory according to the facts rather than make the facts fit his theory. The aim of such a Jewish philosophy is to achieve a critical understanding of the foundational beliefs, assumptions, logical structure, and implications articulated in the data, thus taking the texts and practices of Judaism as given. It should be immediately added, however, that the religion of Judaism was never the exclusive subject matter or datum of Jewish philosophy. Like all ancient and medieval philosophy, medieval Jewish philosophy included both what we call metaphysics, epistemology, and moral philosophy, which themselves include topics unrelated to classical Judaism, like the discussion of substance, matter, and form, causation, the theory of intellects, the nature of motion, and it also included natural philosophy, physics, biology, astronomy, cosmology, astrology, mineralogy, meteorology, mathematics, geography, the science of dreams, and the physiology of perception. Medieval Jewish philosophy was inseparable from the sciences, regardless of their connection to the religion Judaism. So any restriction of Jewish philosophy to religious or theological topics will simply not cut the subject at the right joints. In order to illustrate my earlier claim that the figures engaged in what we now call medieval Jewish philosophy were doing nothing but philosophy, I'll turn now to two episodes at the beginning of medieval Jewish philosophy, which exemplify two different ways in which rabbinic Jewish thinkers encountered philosophy, indeed two different conceptions of philosophy. This, in turn, will direct us to a way in which we might, after all, be able to reconstruct a sense in which they exemplify something called Jewish philosophy.
と思います。
But to appreciate the effect of Judaism's encounter with philosophy, let me say a word first about the religion of the Bible and of the rabbis before their contact with philosophy, and how this earlier Judaism treated matters of belief or doctrine. First, the core of both biblical and classical rabbinic Judaism was normative actions and practices, the correct performance of the Mosaic commandments as elaborated by the rabbis in halakha, Jewish law. The biblical commandments primarily concern the temple, sacrifice, agriculture, purity and impurity, and holiness, that is, that which is set apart is the holy. Practices that serve to distinguish Israel or the Jews as a people from other peoples, dietary laws, dress codes, or the Sabbath. The rabbis expanded the range of practices to cover all aspects of ordinary life, actions that can be performed by any individual, not just priests, in any place, not just in the temple. But for all their differences, both Israelite biblical religion and rabbinic Judaism were primarily focused on how to act, the scriptural commandments and the rabbinic legal elaborations. Of course, there were also general beliefs that were assumed to be held by all Israelites and Jews. For example, that there's one God who created the world, who gave Israel the Torah and its homeland, who chose Israel and sends prophets, whom one must love and serve, and so on. But these beliefs, especially compared to commanded actions, which are thick and dense in rabbinic detail, these beliefs are relatively thin. They're never systematically organized or justified like a science, frequently mentioned only within narratives or non-legal agadah, that is stories, as expressed as terse, epithet-like interpretations of scriptural verses in sermons or exegetical contexts. Unlike actions, neither the Bible nor the rabbis attempt to legislate belief or demand explicit official acceptance of a catechism, confession, or creed, although they do have their red lines and exclude those who deny certain beliefs about God, the Torah and prophecy, or reward and punishment. And they exclude them as heretics and sectarians. The absence of analysis and argument for theological and philosophical doctrines stands in sharp contrast to the detailed, subtle, abstract legal argumentation concerning behavior. In short, the core of biblical and rabbinic Judaism was orthopraxis, right action, rather than orthodoxy, right belief. There were two main avenues by which philosophical reasoning entered medieval Judaism, both of them during the Islamicate period, so roughly from 750 to 1300. The first was through the kalam, which literally means speech, or like the Greek word logos, word, argument, or reason. And as a kind of philosophical worldview, it's nowadays translated as Islamic dialectical or rational theology. Kalam originated in two ways. First, from attempts to give systematic general accounts based on reason of the normative or obligatory beliefs of the Quran and its oral tradition, the Sunnah or Hadith. And second, through the use of reasoning to justify, understand, and defend early Islam against Syriac Christian opponents who forced Muslims to develop a rational theology in defense of their religion. The second polemical origin of kalam is reflected in its dialectical logic and dialogical style of writing characteristic of polemical exchanges. But the important point for us is that throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, the spirit of kalam, best represented by the dominant school of Mutazilites, was that reason is necessary in order to establish the basic tenets of Islam, which otherwise would be based on imperfect grounds of authority and tradition. And this conception of the role of reason in religious belief deeply influenced our first Jewish figure, Sadia. The second avenue through which Judaism encountered philosophy, in a broad sense of the term philosophy, was via the philosopher, which is the Arabic term reserved specifically for members of the movement who saw themselves as the heirs and continuation of the works of Aristotle translated into Arabic and interpreted through Neoplatonic lenses. In the second narrow sense of the term, philosophy, or falsafa, begins with the translation of the corpus of Greek philosophical and scientific works into Arabic in the 9th and 10th centuries, one of the great achievements of Islamic civilization in the Middle Ages. The philosopher, in turn, saw themselves continuing, commenting on, and expanding this Aristotelian or Greek heritage. And this led to original philosophical works by figures like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Averroes or Ibn Rushd, and I would add by our second Jewish figure, Moses Maimonides. In short, both Kalam and Falsafa follow and employ reason, an attempt to construct sciences or systematic bodies of belief and knowledge. The difference between them is that the philosopher saw themselves as importing a foreign element, a foreign Hellenistic perspective into Islam, and their allegiance went primarily to Aristotle, while Kalam promoted a much more indigenous Islamic point of view based on Arabic language and grammar and the Quran and its interpretation as a religion. I now turn to Saadia Gaon, whom modern scholars often refer to as, quote, the first Jewish medieval philosopher. This is a correct description insofar as Saadia was a philosopher in the broad sense who used reason to justify and understand the revealed beliefs of Judaism. But he was not one of the philosopher. He did not see himself as someone continuing, commenting on, or expanding the Aristotelian or Greek heritage. Instead, Saadia's conception of philosophy was that of Mutazilite Kalam. Although part of his motivation is apologetic and polemical, Saadia's deeper philosophical goal and his view of the role of reason as a divinely given instrument was to render both the world and revealed scripture as rationally understandable as possible. One must accept the Torah and believe its revealed truths on divine authority. But as with the Christian philosopher Augustine, through reason, one can transform mere acceptance on authority into understanding and thereby certain knowledge. At the same time, Saadia also recognizes limits to reason. In his seminal systematic explanation of the Mosaic commandments, he distinguishes two classes of laws: rational commandments that can be given intelligible, utilitarian, or moral reasons, and heard or obeyed laws that are conventionally adopted by societies and are not rationally necessary or universal, but can be given ad hoc reasons once they are commanded. Saadia was also the first to endow Jewish philosophy with a strong hermeneutic dimension. His commentaries on various books of the Hebrew Bible, which he was also the first to translate into Arabic, were the first to constrain the interpretation of Scripture to reason. In other words, where Scripture contradicts what reason or science has established, for example, where God is contrary to reason described in corporeal and anthropomorphic terms, reason trumps Scripture, which we then reinterpret figuratively. And he was also the first to interpret a scriptural text, the book of Job, as a philosophical dialogue between philosophical schools debating a philosophical problem, theodicy. We've said that Saadia is often designated as, quote, the first medieval Jewish philosopher. Chronologically, he was not the first. Nonetheless, there is an important sense in which Saadia is truly the first figure in what I would call medieval Jewish philosophy. And now I want to say a word about how we ought to understand that phrase, that title, medieval Jewish philosophy. I argued earlier that we cannot distinguish Jewish philosophy as a branch or domain of philosophy by its language, by the national and religious identities of its authors, by its subject matter, or by its method or approach. What Jewish philosophy does is nothing but philosophy. But what does make this group or series of individual philosophers into what we might call a philosophy, namely Jewish philosophy, is their shared discourse, who they address and cite, who they support, criticize, or comment on, who influences whom and is influenced by. That is, Jewish philosophy is, quote, a tradition, a succession of thinkers whose thought is conditioned in one way or another by a knowledge of their predecessors in the line. And a tradition can include both those who positively develop earlier stages and those who react critically to earlier ones. These relations, which we may call influence, are essentially causal, and it's often possible to identify such a discourse only post facto. But where a group of individual philosophers are causally interconnected in this way, they constitute their own sphere of discourse. They share certain assumptions, they develop a shared vocabulary, inhabit one intellectual space. So what marks off medieval Jewish philosophy from philosophy, or even medieval philosophy in general, is that it is a distinct tradition. A tradition need not be exclusionary. Its boundaries can be permeable. The tradition of early medieval Jewish philosophy is embedded in and grows out of Islamic philosophy and its Greek sources, while later medieval Jewish philosophy is rooted in a world of Christian scholastic philosophy. It's not always clear how to distinguish when the Jewish philosophers are talking to Muslims and Christians, or simply talking about them. Thus, Jewish philosophy has no one methodology or unique or particularistic subject matter, no linguistic, ethnic, national, or religious criteria for citizenship. What makes it a Jewish tradition? Well, no one feature, but its causal relations to many. So while the subject matter of Jewish philosophy need not be anything Jewish, it's almost always causally related to something Jewish, a text or phenomenon that triggered philosophical questions, and sometimes the identities of its participants, or their language, or its later impact. So being Jewish or written in Hebrew or Hebrew characters, or being about Judaism, is neither necessary nor sufficient to be Jewish philosophy, but these factors may serve as defeasible diagnostic tools, that is, superficial signals of a Jewish philosophical tradition. And these causal impacts can be extremely very indirect. So for example, a passing comment about meteorology, the weather, in Maimonides' guide, while explaining the story of creation in Genesis, led Samuel ibn Tibon to translate Aristotle's Meteorology. This was the first Hebrew translation of an Aristotelian work, a translation that then played a central role in subsequent discussions of Genesis, providence, and prophecy, hence arguably an important text in medieval Jewish philosophy, even though it's a scientific work by Aristotle, not by a Jew, not originally in Hebrew, and not directly about Judaism. And the translation of the Meteorology in turn led to translations of the rest of the Aristotelian corpus, which in turn led to commentaries on those Aristotelian texts, commentaries that constitute an important part of medieval Jewish philosophy. In sum, where we find continuous dialogue and exchange of this sort, we can speak of a distinctive medieval Jewish philosophy, even though each of the philosophers is simply doing philosophy. This is admittedly a deflationary definition, and some might want to object that really I'm denying that there is such a thing as Jewish philosophy. But that conclusion, I think, underestimates the importance of particular discourses or traditions in the history of philosophy in general. From this perspective, Saadia was the first medieval Jewish philosopher, because he was the one who first initiated a tradition to which others added or reacted, beginning with Bachya ibn Pakuda and Maimonides. As we turn to the second encounter, I'll try to develop this theme in more depth. From the second moment began when Jewish thinkers met Philosopher, Arabic Aristotelian philosophy. Unlike their exposure to Kalam, which led to their appropriation of reason to justify, conceptually systematize, and understand revealed truths, this encounter was more of a collision between two competing authorities, Moses and Aristotle, and two canonical texts, the Torah, both written and oral, on the one side, and the Aristotelian corpus, including its Hellenistic and Arabic commentators, on the other. This encounter was a confrontation between two different conceptions of human perfection: piety achieved through the performance of the commandments versus intellectual perfection achieved through science and knowledge; between a transcendent God who's the necessarily existent cause of the motion and being of the eternal cosmos, and a voluntaristic and often anthropomorphically and anthropopathically described personal God who created the world ex nihilo, intervenes in history, and changes nature miraculously; and between two ways of life, each with its own education or training leading to its own brand of happiness: a rabbinic education based on laws governing the Mosaic commandments, and the Aristotelian curriculum that goes from logic through the natural sciences to metaphysics. The challenge in this encounter was not merely whether and how to use reason to understand beliefs obeyed on the authority of revelation and thereby render them certain. That was what the Kalam was doing. This was a confrontation between two rival authorities and two entirely different and often opposed intellectual cultures and conceptions of truth. Our best witness to this encounter is Moses Maimonides, arguably the greatest rabbinic figure both in law and philosophy of the Middle Ages, and there's no better description of the intense tension of the encounter than his description in his Guide of the Perplexed of perplexity as a mental tug of war between the external sense of the Torah and the demands of his intellect, namely philosophy. We first see the impact of this second encounter in Maimonides' monumental legal writings, which integrate philosophy with classical rabbinic law. Maimonides does nothing less than reconceive Judaism as a philosophical religion. Recall that classical rabbinic Judaism focused almost exclusively on how to act, with little to say about what one should believe. Maimonides radically shifts the focus. He lays down 13 foundational principles about God, prophecy, the Torah, reward and punishment, the Messiah, and resurrection, that everyone in the community of Israel must believe regardless of how they act. These beliefs, not actions, are necessary and sufficient to belong to the community of Israel, and in classic rabbinic terms, to have a share in the world to come. His code of law opens with an exposition of Aristotelian metaphysics, cosmology, and natural science, whose study he makes a religious obligation and indeed the summit of the rabbinic curriculum. And throughout his code, Maimonides complements detailed legal discussions with philosophical rationales and conceptualization. This blending of philosophy and halacha, or law, created a new Judaism, a philosophical religion whose core worship of God is not through praxis, but by correct belief and the acquisition of scientific and philosophical knowledge. Maimonides' philosophical masterpiece, The Guide of the Perplexed, set the agenda for all subsequent Jewish philosophy up to the present day. If we think of Jewish philosophy as a causally intra-connected tradition, Maimonideanism is a sub-tradition within it. The guide generated a tradition of commentaries and treatises that stretches over at least 3 centuries, either elaborating and applying Maimonides' program, interpreting his enigmatic, puzzle-like work, supporting his views by references to Muslim or Greek authorities, or criticizing him. In a letter to his Hebrew translator, Samuel ibn Tibon, Maimonides directed him to his Arabic and Hellenistic sources. This in turn produced translations over the following centuries from Arabic into Hebrew that made the Aristotelian corpus and its commentaries accessible to Jews outside the Arabic-speaking world, and whose translations in turn produced a significant philosophical literature in Hebrew, ranging beyond theology to logic, physics, astronomy, and the sciences, commentaries, super-commentaries, treatises, and encyclopedias. This full range of shared discourse and conversation triggered by Maimonides' guide comprises the tradition we call medieval Jewish philosophy. One of the central topics in this discourse is the very relation between philosophy and the Torah. According to many, their tenuous relation also shaped the way in which the guide is composed. Maimonides tells us that he'll conceal his own beliefs from the popular reader by dividing and scattering topics to create an appearance of disorganization and by employing deliberate contradictions. Instead, he hints at his own true views for philosophers using what he calls chapter headings and parables. Maimonides' 13th and 14th century disciples and commentators, and in the past century, Leo Strauss, picked up on this unique literary form of the guide, producing the influential view that the guide, and by analogy the Torah itself, is written on multiple levels of meaning, with an explicit exoteric meaning addressed addressed to the community at large, and a concealed esoteric meaning addressed to a philosophical elite. The precise relation between these different levels is, however, a matter of endless controversy. One view follows the spirit of many medieval thinkers who, facing contradictions, tend to gloss the differences and harmonize the competing authorities, rather than conclude that one is right, the other wrong. Thus, the guide aims to harmonize or synthesize revelation and reason, the Torah with Aristotelian philosophy, by giving philosophical arguments that rationally support the traditional views of the Torah. A second view claims that the secret of the guide, concealed by its literary form, is that reason and revelation, or Aristotle and the Torah, are insurmountably incompatible, and that Maimonides' own true beliefs are on the side of reason or philosophy as opposed to the Torah. So Maimonides really believes in eternity rather than creation, and in the God of the philosophers, not of revelation. The Torah is at best a kind of popular philosophy by means of which the philosopher can found and control a community. And Maimonides, like the author of the Torah, wrote the guide in his secretive way to control the dissemination of philosophical truth and prevent it from reaching the wrong ears. A third class of medieval readers think that the secret of the guide is that Aristotle is identical with the Torah according to its concealed esoteric meaning. In other words, the true but hidden meaning of the Torah just is the philosophical truth. The Torah literally describes God as a body in anthropomorphic and corporeal terms, only in order to accommodate the general reader or multitude. But the true meaning of those descriptions is that God is a perfect, immaterial, transcendent, necessarily existing intellect. This last approach, in other words, the philosopher's God, this last approach led to a long tradition of Maimonidean philosophical scriptural exegesis, deepening the hermeneutic dimension introduced by Sadya, but now decoding or translating scriptural terms and claims into Aristotelian categories and doctrines in order to show that the true meaning of the Torah is nothing but Aristotle translated into Hebrew. Its rich development of this genre of philosophical scriptural commentary, exegesis as a way of doing philosophy, is one of the great contributions of medieval Jewish philosophy to philosophy in general. Okay, I'm going to skip, for reasons of time, a fourth way of interpreting Maimonides, but you can ask me about that in the questions and answers, and I'll just conclude with one final paragraph. We've now seen two ways in which philosophy and Judaism, or the Jews, first came into contact in the Middle Ages with philosophy, through the use of reason to understand and justify beliefs, and in a confrontation between two authoritative bodies of knowledge. In both cases, the Jewish philosophers were simply doing philosophy, giving and evaluating arguments, exposing presuppositions, drawing distinctions on classic philosophical problems. All that unites them under one umbrella, Jewish philosophy, is a variety of causal relations of influence, positive and negative, by which they came to constitute a tradition. This Jewish philosophical tradition proved itself not only for Judaism, but also as a source of philosophical insight into classical philosophical problems about the ultimate cause of being, the nature of human happiness, the character and scope of human knowledge. Medieval Jewish philosophy not only transformed Judaism, it's also a rich and distinctive contribution to the many traditions of philosophy.